Okay, so today we are going to go over a strategy that is very helpful with regards to creating a summary of text. We're going to be using an informational text, which I believe is probably the harder of the two kinds of text to summarize. How do you feel about informational text? Like when you read it and you are now tasked with having to come up with even just the main idea or the key details. What do you think of versus literature text?
It's kind of harder.
And what makes it harder for you?
Finding the details.
Finding, okay.
I like the main idea in it.
Okay. So what about you? That's good. I understand what you're saying, yeah.
It's like
Do you want to make them, it's harder?
yeah.
What about you guys? Do you feel, do you agree with Ava and CJ that it's harder?
I agree with Ava and CJ.
So can you kind of quantify or put it to words what makes it harder?
Like
What about
it
the
being
text?
realistic versus being it fake. It's
Okay.
like harder being.
That it's real?
Yeah. And there's
Okay.
a lot of main ideas.
There's a lot of main ideas. That's what I was hoping you would get to. There's usually a lot of details, a lot of information. So informational text is jam-packed with details, if you will. So what I'm going to teach you today is a strategy called coding your text. And that is a strategy to help you identify key details that you may use to formulate your main idea and then create a summary. Okay? So you have what I'm about to read in front of you, but I'm going to read it from the anchor chart. So coding a text is where you read through the text to decide what is interesting and what is important. Do you think the interesting key details are things that we're going to use to create a main idea or to use in our summary?
No.
Probably not, yeah. Okay, so let's look at what qualifies something as an interesting, something interesting in the text. So it'd be something neat to read about, fun facts, your opinion that it's interesting. Okay, you may think it's interesting, you may not. And then lastly, it's not always important to the article or to the subject matter. Okay? And then the important things that we want to code are we need the information for the topic. We need to know the information to understand the topic or main idea. It's vital to the text, or it's something that actually answers a question for us about the text. Okay? Do you have any questions on this so far? All right. So what we're going to do is, when we code the text, we need to decide how we want to code it. So when we code something, we're going to highlight it, and then we're going to write down whether it's IN for interesting or IM for important. And so we'll annotate that just right next to the passage that we highlight.
Okay.
All right, so let's look at the, can you read the title for me, Jacob?
What is motion?
What is motion, okay? And below the picture, can you read what's below the picture? CJ.
This or that?
Below the picture, yeah.
Motion is a change of position. Something has to move to change its position. You are in motion when you swing back and forth.
Okay. Motion is a change of position. Something has to move to change its position. Okay. What important sentence or what important phrase do you think kind of is something that we should highlight for the definition of motion? Ava.
Motion is a change of position.
Absolutely. Motion is a change of position. Let's highlight that, and then we'll talk about the other words in the definition and why they may not be quote unquote important. Let's highlight this. I need you to take your pencil, and at the beginning of the sentence, I want you to put a IM for important. Okay, let's talk about the last sentence, why that might not be coded as important. You are in motion when you swing back and forth.
It's not really important. It's not. I think it's interesting because.
You think it's interesting? Okay.
Because you know when you're in motion, it tells you when you're in motion.
Okay.
It's like a fun fact.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that you're right. It's something more of like a fun fact. Or in actuality, I think we would qualify it a little bit more as like a detail of motion. The thing that you highlighted is the general definition for motion. So before we turn, let's look at the text feature at the above, underneath the one that says vocabulary. Can you read those words for me, Ava?
Motion, distance, and speed.
Why do you think those words are a part of this first page that includes the definition of motion?
Because it's the, like it's in a title.
Okay.
Motion.
All right.
And distance. If you have a change of position, you're walking.
Okay.
You change like distance.
Okay, so we've got motion. What about speed? So let's just keep that in mind. We may not be able to answer that question quite yet, but just keep those three words in mind. Motion, distance, and speed. Okay, let's turn the page. So this information is laid out in text boxes, which I kind of like. Is there any other text features on this page that help you to understand the information that you're about to read?
Pictures.
The pictures. Okay, so remember, text features also include what the text looks like. So look at that text, the two paragraphs, and is there something different about a certain word in the text than the other words? Anthony?
Bolded.
It's bolded. Very good. And what two words are bolded on this page?
Distance and speed.
Distance and speed. Okay. And sorry, just had a. So going back to the vocabulary words that we saw, what two words were included in those vocabulary words that we're about to read about?
Distance and speed.
Distance and speed. Do you think that that these two topics might be kind of important to the definition of motion? Absolutely. Okay.
Because they're bolded.
Very good. Okay. So, Jacob Wilson, will you read for us the first text box on distance?
Distance is how far one place is from another. Distance is often measured in inches, yards, and miles. You can use a ruler to measure distance.
Okay. Very good. Okay, so let's look at all of these sentences within this paragraph. Can anyone tell me the important information, something we should code as important? If you want to take a moment to reread the paragraph, feel free. Go ahead, Ava.
I think it's how far. Wait, I think the sentence that is important is distance is how far one place is from another.
Very good. And that sentence would be a basic definition. Very good. Thank you. So let's highlight that and code it.
I think the other two sentences are like fun facts. Basically.
Fun facts, okay, or something that would be interesting. So, we want to code those sentences, but do we want to highlight them? Would you highlight them? If they were just interesting?
No.
Why would you not want to highlight it? I agree. Why do you think you'd not want to highlight it?
They're not really important.
Just interesting and
Okay.
Just a fun thing to know.
Thing to know. Okay. So as you go back, after we would go through and code all of this, this text, you would go back at that point to start writing down the key details to formulate your main idea. If everything is highlighted, does that make it easier or harder for you to pick out the key details that you want to use?
Harder, because you don't
Harder.
know what to pick.
Harder.
Because the highlighted would be important, and so you would know that. Yeah.
Right. And so we highlight text so that it jumps out to the eye.
And if you highlight it a lot, you won't know.
Exactly. So you guys are at the age where you're starting to really learn the strategy of highlighting. Typically, kids want to highlight everything. Okay.
Because it's fun to highlight.
Right, it's fun to highlight, it looks good, right? So you need to keep that in mind. And actually, this was a skill that I learned kind of later in my educational career that I wish I had known before that. But you want to really only highlight that important information. So what I do is I would bracket, and I'll show you what that looks like. I would bracket the text and put I in, if you want to see what that looks like. And if you want to circle the IN, sometimes you can do that too. It helps the I when you're going back to review the information of stuff that you want and don't want. Okay. All right, who wants to read the next passage? I mean the next paragraph rather.